Welcome to the AI+HI project. I'm Nicole Bradford, SHRM's executive in residence for AI+HI. Thanks for joining us. This week, we're diving into SHRM's new AI Enablement for HR program and exploring how targeted AI enablement can drive equity, innovation, and transformation in the workplace. Our guest is Arturo Ferreira, founder and chief instructor of Upscaile AI Training. Arturo is a trailblazer in AI education, dedicated to equipping professionals with the skills and mindset needed to thrive in an AI-driven world. From designing hands-on training programs for global enterprises to championing responsible AI adoption, Arturo's work is at the forefront of integrating technology with human potential. I've really been looking forward to this conversation too, because Arturo is a world-class educator. I have seen him teach and explain AI to a variety of different HR audiences. And so I am thrilled to have him on this podcast so that you too can experience what I've seen. So Arturo, thank you for coming and welcome to the AI+HI project.
That's phenomenal. That's probably the best intro I've ever gotten. I feel like I should be running out of a tunnel with fog around me. Thank you.
Well, HR leaders are both first responders for what's happening in AI, and they're also in the crosshairs for what's happening with AI. And so they are hungry and passionate about learning how to use it. And I've really seen you. I've really seen the way that you explain things, and so it's like you're the person for the moment. But before we get started, I want to discuss some numbers. As you know, SHRM, we do an extensive amount of research, and we have a large team of analysts who are constantly looking at the market and also surveying our members to understand the state of the membership. And so SHRM research shows that while 65% of HR professionals use AI, only 4% claim advanced knowledge. And my question to you is, what do these numbers tell you about the current state of AI in HR?
Yeah, what the numbers tell me is that people are using it without confidence, right? It's like, we're using it, but are we doing the right things? What experience compared to those numbers or in conjunction with those numbers tells me is we are kind of at this crossroads of where the new level of technology, the new phase we're entering as a professional and social world is at odds with the way that we have kind of been raised. I think we are all still in a place of surprise and shock that something so advanced could be so straightforward to use. And I think that's where people fall off. It's like, it can't possibly be this easy to get the results that we need. So when I teach and when I train people on how to use this, it has a lot less to do with the techniques and the technology and a lot more to do with just the shift in mindset of the moat that was once technology no longer exists. It's, AI is not a technology that you need to learn and study. It's just something you have to practice. What was once a pretty large wall or hurdle to access really in-depth insights or powerful results is kind of gone. It's just a matter of reframing and thinking through. So, the summary is I think people are just expecting a lot more. And I'm not saying there aren't advanced ways to use generative AI, but for the most part, the majority of users, I think, are further ahead than they realize. And that comes out in training.
So what I'm hearing then, Arturo, is that people might be further along than they think they are, and that it's really a mindset change. Given that, what are some other misconceptions that people have? Like, what are the biggest misconceptions that HR professionals have about AI in addition to what you just mentioned?
I think the biggest misconception was from a survey that I recently saw that asked several thousand people across various industries and verticals how afraid they are of being replaced. And at the very top of that list was HR. 43% of respondents that identified as HR professionals were in fear of being replaced. At the very bottom were doctors and attorneys, like 8 or 9%. I actually think that's reversed.
Mhm.
It's interesting to me that HR is deeply concerned. And to be fair, data ingest, analytics, anything that requires pattern recognition or memorization is prime for AI restructuring and change. But I think HR is poised to lead a new generation because the nexus of all things AI, compliance, governance, how humans interact with it, training, all of that meets in the HR department. When you look at law, when you look at medicine, I would say those two are some of the most ready to change. And not just medicine, like I go to the doctor to get sick, but research and development, billing. Like there's so many verticals within these two that I think those are ready to change, along with so many others. I do see that HR is kind of missing the forest for the trees, where AI is going to change everything. That's true. So to touch on what you said, that like we're both curious and afraid as HR people, that's true. Like you're kind of like being asked to be the spearhead of something, but also possibly train your replacement. But
Mhm.
that's happening right now with developers, right? Like, you have Google and all these other big names offering 7+ figure salaries for an AI engineer. You better believe that person is very much programming something that's going to replace them in the next 2 to 5 years,
Mhm.
right? That's what the money is for. So all that to say that I think HR is poised to navigate a new era. And I think whatever comes next, the infinitely chaotic variable that is a human being will kind of be at the center of that. And the professionals that know how to navigate, manage, and handle that variable, the human individual, I think they're going to be in greater need than ever before.
I agree with you, and also I think it's the sort of like the new shape of the HR role, which is going to have a lot of data supporting it. It's going to be more generalist than it's been in the past. I think many of the silos um, are going to get a little bit less siloed, but that modern HR leader is going to be essential. And one of the things that we're starting to see in the market is HR having IT folded into it, and sometimes it's the other way. Um, HR gets folded into it. It has a lot to do with who the leader is and the way that they are able to lead that sort of determines which way it's going. But we've seen cases like Moderna, where Tracy Franklin now is the CHRO and the chief digital officer, and so she's responsible for their internal AI transformation. Not on the, of course, not in the on the product and life sciences. That's that those are the science teams, but in terms of how that company operates. So, how does the lack of training and knowledge hold HR teams back from realizing AI's full potential?
There's no specific answer to that. It's the same way that lack of training and knowledge holds us back in anything, right? It makes it very difficult to do anything if you're untrained and lack confidence. You know, we I think so. I open a lot of my trainings with a quote from Anne Hathaway. It was a recent interview she did in Vogue, actually. And she says, I had to go back to a beginner's mindset. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but like, I had to be okay with sucking. Like you have to be okay with that. And there is a dip in productivity, right? But the faster you can just run headlong into that dip, the sooner you pop out of it into a whole new era of productivity, right? What what I'm seeing beyond the HR department, because at the individual level, there is interest, there is curiosity, there is hunger. What I'm actually seeing is at the higher level is, if we look at evolutionary biology, you kind of have this idea that a thing will evolve until it doesn't need to anymore. And that's true in a professional and corporate setting as well. So when you have something that has gotten really effective over time and has an established process, it's extremely difficult to undo that process, right? At a large organization level, that's true, but as individuals, right? Like we get into our habits, especially once you get to a certain age. I've got 3 kids, I'm constantly tired and so forth. Like I have my process, and so I want to move forward. But humans are uniquely unsuited to doing something differently, right? That's why we form habits. When we extrapolate that to the organizational level, it becomes a lot more complex because AI moves so quickly that unless you are adopting now, and you are still early, but that train is moving, By the time you realize, okay, let's get on the train, at the rate of adoption or lack thereof that I'm seeing, that train is going to be 8 stations past where you're trying to get on. So it's this really interesting nuance right now of like, yes, we want to move slowly to like Pat Opit's letter back in March to financial organizations where yes, AI is good, but who's thinking about security? But by the same token, it is happening and we need to move fairly quickly. And I think you actually touched on this in Chicago like 2 years ago, where you were talking about the adoption curve at an enterprise level and how it was kind of moving at a snail's pace. So in the
Mm-hmm.
time, because we didn't really run into each other in San Diego this year, since the last time we had that conversation in Chicago, what have you seen? Like, have you seen the adoption curve change with any significance?
Mm. So there's sort of the macro and the micro. So when you zoom completely out, AI is still in a very small percentage of US businesses. So it's still at the very, very beginning there and it's inching out. But we've seen things like the amount of reference in security documents, like the annual reports in the risk section about AI. It's pretty clear that boards and, of course, for public companies, the street is really looking at what people are doing with AI. So there's a lot of pressure on CEOs. And with that pressure on CEOs and just also sort of like the competitive pressures that they can see. And to circle back to something you said earlier, about your feeling that actually, lawyers, um, you know, they're um, it's going to change really quickly for them. I would say anyone who does billable hours, that like all of those business models are changing. So there's more pressure for change and more indications that change must happen than when you and I met in Chicago 2 years ago. And the other thing that's happening is where, companies um, are getting through their first rounds of failure, and that's important. I call it the hard. So we're getting into the hard. So the first 2 years were like, oh my gosh, what is AI? We have to do it. People like you and me often get asked, like, how do I AI? And it's like,
Yep.
well, that's like saying, how do I fruit? When there's bananas and oranges and apples and how do I train? How do I get fluency? And so, we're getting to the place where people are finally ready to pixelate. Different people in the organization need different types of training. Some roles need very deep training. Some roles just need basic training. And so for companies that are managing their ROI and also managing their outcomes, being able to break things down and having the experience and to have had a little bit of disappointment is actually quite good. And so now we're in the place where you're starting to see really strong examples that can be adopted. One of the more recent examples that just came out is how well Dell has done. Dell is a company that is, like that whole company is about executional rigor. And they have a culture around executional rigor. And so 2 years ago, their CTO was given the mandate, you have 2 years to get us AI ready. And they, in their most recent communication about how their transformation has gone, like they did it in a very Dell style and they have been successful. And so we're starting to see really great examples that other companies can look at. And then the last thing I would say is that there's more and more of these announcements where you have a CEO saying to their entire company, you cannot get an open headcount unless you can prove that that role cannot be done by AI.
Mm.
And I have to admit, it's like the first time I heard it, the first time I heard the first CEO say that, because there's Spotify, a bunch of others, but it's not uncommon. I, you know, I interpreted it as it was sort of like a workforce transformation type thing. But now, um, the way that I hear it now is that how do you get into the culture that the mindset shift is not optional? You say things like that. And even if you're not laying off people or things like that, it's like that's the thing that makes people understand that they must. So that was a long answer to your question, but I would say things are still in motion. But now we have examples. We have enough failure to be ready for success. And there's ever increasing pressure. So I think over the next 2 years, we're really going to see companies just start to fly.
Mm. Yeah, I hope that's true because I think the danger of the speed of AI is that the few earliest adopters get an insurmountable lead. I don't see that being the
Mm.
case yet, but I can see that being the case if there isn't sufficient proliferation across the board. And if any in the audience have ever heard me or seen me, there's a quote that I bring up constantly by Dr. Sam Samand, who wrote The Singularity of Hope. And when I asked him, like, what does he say to people that are worried about being replaced, he goes, AI is not taking anyone's jobs. It's going to do the jobs it was always meant to do. The problem is we have spent decades teaching people to think like machines. And I think right now we're going to run into this issue where we've untrained critical thinking for so many people, which has made us successful in many areas. Hyper specialization is not uncommon, right? In nature and in the corporate world. Like, that's important. We need to have our roles in an organization. That's true in the corporate world, in the natural world, the military, you name it. But because AI lets us functionally work like little octopi and be able to do multitude more tasks and increase our productivity, unless we're able to take a seat at the upper level, upper echelon of critical thinking and reasoning that lets us kind of bring it all together, companies that can't do that are very quickly going to, in my opinion, going to be overtaken by smaller, punchier organizations. It will be the BlackBerries and the Blockbusters at a whole new scope and order of magnitude.
Yes. And also the other danger that's out there is that, and now that we're 2 years in, one of the things that is clear is that the real value comes from having, is really taking something deep into how one's workflows should change for I call it the 3 Cs, your context, culture, and customers. And so off the shelf usage of these products only makes you and your competitor identical. It's only like you only get the ROI when you adjust it for your context, culture, and customers. And and then use that to change the workflows. And every company is different. Like not every company can do like Dell's executional rigor is not appropriate for every company. It isn't. There's other companies where the culture is a little bit different. So, for example, Salesforce has an internal platform that they use to really for talent mobility and also it's learning and development and talent mobility and a bunch of things. And that's a company that has great executional rigor, but also they're a company where it's not a company where mandates work well. So if you mandate, and they talked about this at the AI+HI project last year, when they mandated AI educate, or when in the past when they mandated things, everybody did it, but not everybody internalized it. And so that's like that. So mandates don't work in their culture the way you might imagine. But what they did instead is, and so when they came to AI, they knew that, okay, we can't make it a mandate. But what they did is they added to the performance review how AI, how AI flexible you were, curious you were. And so if on one side of the spectrum, it's total choose your own adventure about becoming AI fluent, and on the other side is like everybody you must, when they just did the lever of adding it to the performance reviews, they I think I don't want to quote the wrong numbers, so I'm just gonna it's from memory, but it's like in the 80s, like the number of the enthusiastically, their people just went into it because the system, they have a culture where people really like to know what's valued. And as soon as they told them what was valued, they, got the kind of adoption that they're looking for, and I think is inspiring. And so, culture, context, and customers is really critical for this. Or you end up a company just ends up looking like any other. And so, eventually, when adoption is more widespread, if people are not really doing that, then they've just made themselves a me too. So, but okay, I could talk to you forever, and you and I also could talk about data and dirty data and a bunch of other things, but, um, everyone dirty data just means your data's not ready for AI, and it's not tagged in such a way that your organization can use it. I'm really curious and would love for you to explain to our audience about SHRM's AI enablement program in HR and how it helps teams develop a guiding vision for AI adoption.
Sure. So the last 2-ish years, right, I've been teaching the specialty credential. Specialty credential was born from the need to upskill the individual. So when I have a cohort, I'll have 25 to 80 people in a class, and we'll go through 18 hours of training and we're finished, and there's a capstone exercise. And at least my approach is the capstone ties into your course because I want you to create a solution that you think would help you every day. So after some time of teaching this, it occurred to me that we could marry the specialty credential with something that my company's been doing for a few years, which is essentially AI readiness audits. Where are you in your AI readiness according to people, processes, and tech? Right? Because that's the beauty of AI. There's automation, and then there's like the agentic level. So we kind of go from augmentation, automation, and agentic, right, in this sort of flow. And the way we've structured the new enablement program is where the cohorts in the original specialty credential, which we still teach, were a couple dozen people individually there. The enablement program is actually for one organization to send their team, their HR team, 10, 15, 20 people on the team to come through as a group. And now it's a little bit truncated, so there's no credential at the end. But what we do is essentially give you a lot of the same basic training to engage and prompt, but we'll help you start creating your own specific solution to an everyday problem, whether that's scheduling in emails, whether that's internal HR queries, whether that's fielding employee questions. I mean, there's any number of things that we can teach how to automate. And we have a really specific guided course that is data driven, and it's organizationally data driven, because the first thing we do with any org is give them an extensive questionnaire. I think it's like 160 questions total, spread across 6 pillars. So you don't necessarily have to answer all of them, but we take the data of what are you doing, what's not working, where's your time, how much data, all kinds of really specific and just, I guess, like bespoke questions to ensure that we have benchmarks and measurable KPIs across the board, so that when we do our assessment 6 weeks after the close of the course, you can go back to management, founders, owners, C-suite, whoever's in charge, and say, here's where we were, here's where we are, here's the plan to keep going.
One of the things that we're hearing from our members, Arturo, is a really a strong desire. They're very interested in strategy, and as SHRM, we like to help people understand where things are going, and that's a part of our, that's a part of one of the things that we can really do for HR leaders. And also, you know, our organization, our membership is really interested in how to, like, okay, I understand the strategy, but then now tell me, and I understand the why, but then not tell me, help me understand, okay, like what can I do? How can I do it? So what we've done in our interview and what we've prepped for you is, to present you with some real world HR challenges and have you talk us through and talk our audience through how to choose the solution for each, explaining why it works and how an HR team could implement it. And so we were calling this the Lightning Lab, and it's just really inspired by, how you teach. And so I'm excited about this. It's the first time we've done it like this. My first question for you is around employee experience. So the case would be a team is struggling to analyze employee engagement survey results quickly enough to act on feedback. What AI tool or approach would you recommend for that?
It's a good question. So I'll kind of use this to talk about a case study that that we actually share when someone calls and says, "Hey, what's this enablement program about? We're thinking of signing up." Customer success managers will be able to kind of share this. So I'll talk through it because you may have the paperwork in front of you. But a few months ago, we were tasked with managing food and beverage companies' HR team. There was like five, call it HR personnel in a 400 person company. They were overworked and understaffed. This is probably a unique scenario. It probably doesn't happen anywhere else in HR. So I'm going to assume that's the case. But what was happening was they were getting a lot of frequently asked questions, call it the same dozen questions over and over again, every day, every week, day in, day out. So we needed to find a solution to address this, right? What ended up being the case was that we took an AI, an agent, virtually a chatbot, a more advanced chatbot, trained it on the handbook on its FAQ, and connected it to both the Microsoft Teams that the organization shared and their payroll software, so that the agent itself would have access real time to stuff like PTO and any pay issues or handbook data, that kind of thing. The end result was 82% of low end queries were able to be answered functionally instantaneously. So, what did that mean for the employee experience? Employees were much happier because their questions were answered right away as opposed to waiting 1 to 3 days to get an answer. HR was happier because they didn't have to waste time answering the same question 10 to 15 times every week. Employees on average were saving an hour per week. HR on average was saving 15 hours per week. So it's a pretty strong overall win scenario when you have something come into play that can navigate the simplistic, repetitive tasks that we often look at and be like, God, there's got a better be a way to do this, right? That's really what it's for. And it touches on the idea of how to kind of get over the AI hump of, yeah, I don't know, I'm not going to use it. It's not, AI isn't smart, right? We talked about this before. It's just fast. So when you're looking at it, it's not this thing that's going to have this catch-all answer for everything at all times, but it is functional like having an intern with every PhD imaginable. It's extremely intelligent with no context, and all you need to do is kind of maneuver it a little bit to be able to identify and slot into the specific issue that you may have. Did that answer the question? I'm not sure.
It did. And just for clarification, for that case, after the team from the company came through and went through the HR enablement program, did were they the ones that built the solution with their internal teams, or or how did that happen?
Yeah. So the way the enablement program works is, we're not training developers. We're training change managers and project managers. And the way to work is we'll kind of give the baseline training for prompt engineering, generative AI engagement, and so forth, with the goal of essentially teaching people to see colors that they may not have names for. Because once you start to understand the limitations and capabilities of generative AI, you're able to more accurately identify processes within your day that can be augmented or even automated. Because it's not a matter of like, okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to replace HR with AI. It doesn't work like that. What we can do, however, is start to say, oh, I understand how I can use this to schedule a meeting across 3 different time zones with 6 different people and create an immediate response if someone replies. So that's part of my weekly productivity meetings. Well, what else do I need to do? Well, I need to have a report run to have my P&L prepared. Well, I can do that with AI as well. So it's finding the little micro processes that slow us down every day and being able to kind of like plug this leak and plug this leak. And little by little, we start to identify. But the development itself would happen either presumably with the IT in-house, or we can also teach, or we will teach the teams on how to correctly vet and select an appropriate vendor.
That's wonderful because it allows people to confidently ask internal or external resources for what they actually want and need help with. And so I think that's really, that's that's the next baby step that really empowers HR leaders. So next question, learning and development. So an HR team, they want to personalize learning and development recommendations for every employee, but they don't have the bandwidth. How can AI help?
So there's an example that draws Cigna from about 3 years ago, I want to say. I could be getting the timeline wrong, but essentially Cigna was losing a lot of they're dropping employee satisfaction, and people were being frustrated because when senior positions opened up, they were hiring more than half of them from external. And to your point, what you said earlier, I'm recalling from memory, so the numbers may not be precise, but they were more than internal. They were definitely going outside recruiting. It wasn't good for morale. It was also a greater arc to bring on board people that maybe weren't already inured with company culture. So what they essentially did was they created a career personality system. And it functionally worked like Netflix for your career, where you would put in your personality, your interests, your goals, your education, your experience, your background, and so forth. And it would preemptively match you with upcoming positions a certain amount of time ahead. And if I remember correctly, it would also say, hey, this position might be a good fit if you were to take this other continuing ed class, or if you were to do this, you would actually be a great candidate for this. And the results were staggering. They went from mostly external to like a fraction of external hires, promoting now internally for the most part. And that's where generative AI comes in. If you think of it as fast and not smart, education, learning and development, that has been free for a while now. From YouTube to TikTok to Khan Academy, education is out there. Like we can take Harvard and MIT classes for free. What generative AI allows us to do is access it much more easily. Because before, if I had to hack through the jungle of YouTube, it took a while. I can right now go into my generative AI and say, I'm interested in this. I have this much time. Give me links in a good order for videos to help me learn about quantum physics. And that's the accessibility piece that's different now that has never been before.
Great. Okay, we're going to do a speed round on something, and this is about pitfalls. So I'm going to say something, and then 2 to 3 word answer around, and the overall topic is pitfalls. So pitfalls for managers.
Not having enough leeway.
Pitfalls for CHROs.
Not trusting your people.
Pitfalls for people just starting out. It's their first day with AI.
Being unwilling to fail.
Excellent. The very last question that we like to ask everyone, for the people, who observe this conversation, what do they do on Monday? So, they've heard what we've talked about. What is the practical first step that they can do on Monday for their AI enablement journey?
Wherever your current web browser is on your phone, right? Chrome, Firefox, Safari, whatever. Take that icon, move it somewhere else, and put your favorite large language model in its place. Whether that's GPT, Copilot, Gemini, replace it. So the habit that you have of, let me look something up, go to your AI and ask it in the same way that you would have. Start there.
That is actually, that's the first time someone has said that. And that is, that is a great, everyone, I concur. I think that is a really great first step. That's it for this week's episode. A big thank you to Arturo for sharing his experience and insights with us. Thanks everyone for joining the conversation, and we'll catch you next time. Did you know our podcast is only one part of the AI+HI project? We also host an annual event featuring visionaries from the worlds of business, tech, and HR. Plus, we publish a weekly newsletter that includes topical articles and the latest research from SHRM, all to help you stay ahead of the trends. To sign up, just make your way to shrm.org/AIHI. And you can also follow SHRM on social media for even more clips and stories. Like, share, and tell us how you're innovating towards a brighter future.
SHRM.